are now listening to the IELTS podcast. Learn from tutors and ex-examiners who are masters of IELTS preparation. Your host, Ben Worthington.
Hello there, IELTS students. In this tutorial, Robert and myself, we're going to talk about developing. I can't even talk for toffee today. We're going to be talking about developing listening skills for the IELTS test. It's a good job we're not talking about speaking skills.
Well, no, we better leave those speaking skills. Yeah.
That's going to be, when I can learn to speak, I'll do the speaking episode. But in today's class, we're going to look at how to get a feel for the language. We're going to look at different ways to immerse yourself in the language. And we're going to share a technique to help you with vocabulary and pronunciation. And this technique I heard from an ex-IELTS examiner, and she said the student improved tremendously fast in like about 10 days or something ridiculous like that. And just before we jump into this, remember, with your IELTS test, you are not alone. You've got IELTSPodcast.com who can help you. We've got a team of experts, writing experts, speaking experts, ex-IELTS examiners such as Rob, who can help you, give you the guidance to get you to band 7 so you can get to New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK, even Wales if you're that way inclined. I'm sure there's some listener that wants to go to Wales. But anyway, now Wales is a beautiful spot and a lovely melodic accent as well. The Welsh are fantastic people. So how are you doing today, Robert?
I'm very well. I have family in Wales, actually. My brother got married to a Welsh woman.
Really?
The Welsh are very, just listen to the way they speak. It's very, very, very poetic, isn't it?
I know. I love it. It's got such a melody to it. It's so friendly.
That's true.
Yeah. They don't sound like farmers like they do in Yorkshire, where I'm from. It's just, it's so much easier on the ears. So if anybody is wanting to develop their listening skills, then have a look on YouTube for those sort of like 40 accents in 60 seconds or 40 accents in 5 minutes. Those are really, really good sort of like introduction to all the different accents we've got in English. So let's jump into today's tutorial. Robert, how can somebody improve their listening skills?
Yeah, you hear this all the time, people who say, well, I understand about 80% or more sometimes of what I hear, but when it comes to those IELTS listening practice tests, I always get mixed up with some questions. I lose concentration and I got no idea what to answer. Okay, I've heard that a lot. But I don't know. What is the problem with this? Why in an age where we have so much access to so many ways to listen to English, don't we? Radio, TV, music, videos, and even podcasts. It's true. It's true. But we're lucky these days to have so much audio and video material available to us. So much just a computer click away. Of course, it's not so simple in some countries. I know that. But there are so many ways to listen to English in some countries and in other countries less. Where I live, I'd say, listening to English through the media I've just mentioned is pretty easy, very easy. It's all around you. Well, wait a minute. I'm not thinking straight. Listening to English through music, TV, or movies is in no way really the same as listening to English in an English language classroom. And if you're taking classes, you'll be given practice in what some people call active listening, listening out for specific information or answering true, false questions and so on. That's not real life, is it? You read a book or you listen to something and someone says, hey, what was that about? And you just give a kind of a paraphrase summary of it. You don't actually answer true, false questions on it. Only in a language classroom. Or
exactly. Nobody asks you after you watched the film. Was the film about crime? Was it about roads? or was it not given? Nobody talks talks like that.
got
And just going back to what
3 seconds to answer. Yeah.
exactly what you were saying about the classroom, this is so true, because when I started studying in Spain for my final year at university, like I'd spent all summer developing my language skills, and then I started at the university. Not only did the tutors speak, like it was like one to many, so it wasn't one-on-one like I'd been doing all summer with a good few friends. It was like one to many, and I didn't have as many visual clues as I did when I was like right up in their face, because that's how Spanish people talk. There's no personal space. There's not as much as there is as there is in England. But anyway, you got more. I got more clues. And I got less clues when I was in uni. But what I wanted to say was, so much more tiring every day after like 5 hours of listening, active listening. I was just worn out. I was shattered, and I would just go home and sleep for an hour, because it just took so much mental concentration and energy just to follow it. And it's a completely different skill. But anyway, sorry, we're going to talk about listening outside of the classroom, in general listening skills, right?
Yeah. I mean, what interests me really is what we're doing outside class to improve our listening skills. I mean, in fact, I recently asked some students of mine, a group we could, I guess, classify as intermediate, kind of pre-IELTS level, I guess. They're not ready for IELTS if they want to take it. I don't know if anybody in that group yet wants to take it, but they can communicate. They're not that advanced yet. But so I asked them what kind or kinds of things they were listening to outside class. And here's a summary of the most interesting things they told me. I mean, one class member in particular said that he tried to listen to as much English as possible as what he called background noise. I mean, he would listen to podcasts on his phone while he was performing other tasks, such as, believe it or not, routine work tasks online while he worked from home. And on the days he went to his workplace with headphones on, driving, the same thing, either the podcasts or sometimes music in English. He wasn't paying particular attention to anything, because what he apparently did with all this regular listening was absolutely nothing. I mean, he never listened to any podcast more than once. He did take notes of what he'd heard, or commented or made comments on their content to anyone else, either in English or in his native Spanish language. It was all just listening. I mean, I guess there is a lot to be said for this. I mean, I think we try to distinguish between language learning, which takes place usually in a classroom when we're conscious of the rules of the game, or someone tells us about rules and we make a conscious effort to learn something, and what we call language acquisition. I mean, that outside class activity, we're just exposed to the language and we hear it in natural settings. I mean, to be honest, you referred to Spanish. I learned Spanish never in a classroom. I have never taken one single class in the language. Just absorbed it, as it were, just by listening and talking and whatever in a natural kind of way. I mean, okay, for this guy, listening to podcasts for him was one way to imitate that natural language acquisition process of when you live in a country where there are limited opportunities to hear spoken English in daily life. So you're trying to imitate it just by listening to it. Okay, it's not quite the same, but I mean, you see where he was getting at there, and it's a good idea. I mean, okay, so here we have it. Now, strategy one, perhaps, take every opportunity to regularly listen to English through whatever means you have, radio, podcast, whatever. And you could call this, I guess, kind of extensive listening. I mean, think for a moment about when you started learning English. Before you could say anything at all, you had to understand what you were hearing, right? And as you made progress, you began to understand more complex messages. You started to listen. It stopped being a kind of a noise around you, and started making a bit of sense. It's what some language researchers call comprehensible input. That sounds very fancy, isn't it? I mean, we understand what we hear or what we read, even though we still can't produce through speech or writing all of what we hear or read. But it does help us to push us up to that next level.
Yeah, I was doing this exact technique actually when I arrived in Spain, and I would just put on the Spanish radio.
Okay.
You know, this was actually before mobiles became like widespread. But I just literally just put on the radio and started making brekkie or whatever. And then my friend came out, Mama, and he said, you know what, why are you listening to this? I said, I don't know. I just needed to listen to Spanish to practice. And it's like, did you choose this on purpose? And I was like, nah, it was just clear. And he's like, you know, it's the Catholic radio, don't you? And I was like, oh gosh. So I was like, all right, wow. And my Spanish was so poor. I had no idea, but I was like, yeah, I can just remember, I can recognize some words of it. I couldn't follow it. And what I liked about this strategy was that just making use of the downtime, you know.
That's right.
And just, you know, if I could get 10% better by doing that all month without any effort, then why not? I'll take 10% a day.
Yeah. I did something similar, but I don't know why I chose sports programs, because the language is going to be so much easier to understand. Football terms. It was fun. That's why you've become a staunch Catholic since then, and you're planning to visit the Vatican City. Okay.
Yeah, that's my other podcast. Yeah, Catholic Life. But you said that this guy, you said he was where was he getting his material from?
Well, some of the stuff I recommended in the class, actually. He got into the BBC website, and there they have a few podcasts. Also, my favorite newspaper, The Guardian.
Right.
They have a whole series of podcasts, which I did a little bit of one in class once. So he got into some of those. And I think he got turned on also to other things, the TED Talks and stuff like that, which are pretty readily available on YouTube and all kinds of sources that you can access pretty quickly.
The BBC, Guardian, TED Talks. The good thing about these is not only is it usually like higher level English, like vocabulary that you're going to come across in your exam, but also you're going to start getting informed about the topics, which is incredibly useful, because so many students approach writing task 2 and their mind goes blank. And what we always say in the course is that, right, it's time to research, time to start filling up your brain with ideas. Guardian, BBC, TED Talks, all premium sources of information, not only to improve your English, but also to get those ideas, improve your listening skills. Just one piece of advice, though, with the TED Talks, try to go for the native English speakers, because obviously they're going to have you're safe that the pronunciation is going to be pretty good, unless they're Scottish, and then you I'm just joking. But go for the native English ones, because I would never learn Spanish from David Smith, unless he was bilingual, but I'm not going to take that chance. So I'm just going to play it safe and go for Manolo Gonzalez. But anyway, let's move on. So next point, where is it now? Let's see. With the background knowledge.
That's right. I mean, yes, obviously. Yeah. As I said, he chose things like BBC, Guardian, TED Talks, and he also said, of course, he added to that he sometimes began then to choose, topics related to his work and business topics in general. We start, it's obvious, from what we know, from the known, where we have the background knowledge, at least in our own language, and we're probably familiar with some of the key terms used when discussing these topics, and that makes comprehension that much easier. So, I mean, this idea of extensive listening, as you were saying, Ben, is also beneficial, I think, when it comes to getting a feel for the language, the rhythm, the stress, the intonation patterns, the entire kind of sound experience. I mean, especially in places where English is not heard so often, I think this kind of listening is so important. I mean, all right, if I'm watching or listening these days to Spanish from Spain, it is rather different to Spanish from Latin America, and the intonation is different. I often feel that when I listen to people speaking from Madrid, for example, to me they feel very flat. They don't have the same feel, or so they don't sound so friendly as people in Latin America, or in fact people in the south of Spain, Andalusia.
Yeah.
So am I wrong or am I right? I don't know, but that I'm feeding the language, and the whole rhythm of it is different. It's just the same as when what I've been doing recently. Actually, I mean, you think I'm mad, but I started watching some of those those incredible Nordic crime shows. I love crime shows on TV. They're in Swedish with English subtitles, and sometimes the subtitles I can only get in Spanish. That's no hang up, but after several hours of listening to Swedish, I mean, I'm beginning to really think that I'm getting a sense of what Swedish sounds like, and how those sounds fit into a more general kind of what I imagine in my head, Swedish cultural pattern. I mean, I'm thinking, this is how the Swedes are. And is this helping me to learn Swedish? Of course not. I mean, I don't understand a word of what they're saying. I mean, I will pretend that I catch the meaning of one or two words that sound a bit like English from time to time, but the language itself is way beyond me. It's too fast. I get the context, and the occasional word. Well, I mean, if I really wanted to learn Swedish, I'd have to take a much more active role, I think. I mean, here we are again. I mean, if my students' extensive listening habits are kind of passive listening without taking direct action, then we also have this idea of active listening. And I guess that's what most teachers would believe in, I think. I mean, your goal of a high band score in IELTS listening is only possible through knowledge and practice of the range of questions you might be asked, and the types of interaction from monologues to dialogues in each section of the test. I mean, most teachers recommend a little every day, 20 to 30 minutes of intensive listening practice a day as your exam date approaches. Yeah, it's all very well. Yeah, and it kind of brings me on to my second example, actually. I mean, in the IELTS listening test, you have to listen, read, and write simultaneously. The 40 questions of those 4 sections will come at you at natural speed, giving you very little chance to do anything but answer the question. I mean, those precious seconds you have before the audio for each section begins is your key to knowing what to listen out for. I mean, so interestingly, my second example is of a class member who explained how she always tried to combine listening with reading. And as she was very fond of literature, she often used audiobooks combined with the printed versions. Saying that it helped her with pronunciation and intonation, as well as helping her to stop whenever she wanted, of course, to pause over a word, a phrase, to make a note of the new item, or simply to listen to parts of the book again. Of course, I guess we could do the same with non-fiction books, podcasts. I mean, I think The Guardian has some great ones where you can listen to I think they call it, they have something called the long read of the week, and you can sometimes get that in an audio. They take a topic and you can read it online as well as following the audio version. I'll check that out. I can't remember exactly where you get into that. It's somewhere on The Guardian. It's great.
Yeah. But it's a great idea just to combine the listening and the reading together, because as we said at the beginning, or just a few seconds ago, the IELTS test is listening, reading, writing, all simultaneously. And there's very, very few times in real life where you have to do all 3. And I know that I would struggle. I'm terrible multitasker, and I can only do one thing at once. And having to combine all those 3 skills is one of those unique, specific exam skills that you definitely need to develop, unless you're incredibly talented and you can just walk in. But 9 times out of 10, person would have to train to get this, to get it right, especially if they're going for a band 7, if they're going for that 75%. And I think audiobooks are a super way to do this, especially, even if it's just, what do you call it? Like you said, the long read, and most like decent websites let you listen to the article, which I think is definitely recommendable.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I asked her and the other class members if this type of active, extensive listening and reading could also be applied to, on-screen stuff, audio, visual media, or whatever. Let's face it, what people do every day these days, streaming services, Netflix, online videos. I mean, we can watch, read the closed caption audio script in English, stop whenever, in some cases, replay it partially or wholly, replay it without sound or subtitles. And I did that in the classroom, or I do that sometimes. Act out the dialogues. You cut out the dialogue, just watch people acting out. What are they saying to each other? And then let's compare it to what they actually really said. I love you. And no, she didn't. I said, I hate you. Look, she's got a gun. So there's all kinds of stuff we can do with this. There's no end to classroom activities there, but and in fact we can just about do anything we want, from just letting the sound and the visual part or the reading part just flow around you, just for pure enjoyment, and what we could call general understanding, to make serious efforts to work on word meanings, pronunciation, intonation, colloquial language, and vocabulary. I mean, in specific areas. In fact, it always makes me laugh when we watch Spanish film. My wife is Spanish, but she's lived in South America for many, many years. So her Spanish is from years ago. And she's from the northwest of Spain, from Galicia. So it's a different kind of Spanish to other people. She speaks Gallego as well. So often we're watching a Spanish film and she says to me, Rob, what did she just say? I said, I don't know. I think she said that. Sometimes I understand it better than she does. She said that, oh, I didn't catch it. I said, well, isn't this your language?
Yeah. And it just shows like all the different accents that are available, not only within Spanish, but also within English and the other languages there. It's definitely better when you are practicing to go for it depends obviously on the exercise you're doing. If you're on one hand, you want to listen to a range of different accents, just to train your ear. But on the other hand, if you're going to do the exercise that I mentioned now, which is the one that the ex-IELTS examiner told me about, then you want to listen to like received pronunciation, which is like, more or less how they speak in the south of England, more or less like Robert speaks.
Yeah. When he's doing that, when he does the podcast.
But this technique, right? She told me about it. She said a student of hers was doing it, and he came to one class and he was reading something, he was talking, and it was okay. But she said he had his exam coming up in about 10 days. And then he came back 7 days and he had improved like a whole half a band score. And he's like, she was like, how did you improve so much? And he said that he'd just been listening to BBC News and pausing it after every like 10, 15 seconds and trying to repeat it. He didn't even understand some of the words that he was saying, but he was just trying to go for the sound, reproduce that sound, and that it goes back to like one of these often sort of like avoided parts of the English language, which is pronunciation, because it's quite difficult to teach. But by not only working on his listening skills, but also trying to reproduce the sounds in his mouth, because we can always think, oh, I can say that, but it's not until you actually do it, does the actual truth come out. True. That was a technique. I mean, it's going to help you with your listening, with your vocabulary, and also, as we found out, with the pronunciation as well. So I think we've almost finished. Is there anything else you want to mention before we finish?
No, I like what you just said. That was interesting example. Because, when we listen to things, I mean, I often do it myself, I think, when you've got a talk to give or a class to give, or when you have to speak in another language in any serious situation, you kind of rehearse it in your head, and sometimes my pronunciation of Spanish is absolutely perfect when I do it in my head. I mean, some sounds come out wrong when I actually do it. Perhaps I should follow what this guy did and actually repeat it out loud more often and not just practice it inside my own head. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And that's probably a podcast is sort of like the difference between like our active vocabulary. What's it? It's active vocabulary and inactive vocabulary. You know, like we can recognize it, we know what it means, but do we actually ever use it? No, probably not. You know, and it's yes, a similar skill. So anyway, we're gonna have to finish. At the end of the podcast, thank you very much for listening. If you want more guidance, more help, if you're aiming for that band 7 and you've got band 6.5 numerous times before, get in contact. We can guarantee you a 7 in the writing. We do it week in, week out. We give you feedback. We give you the exam skills. We give you the language skills. We can help you get to your target country, be it England, UK, Scotland, Wales, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Ireland, wherever the IELTS is accepted, the US, wherever. We can help you get that certificate and move on in life. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you at IELTSPodcast.com.
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.